Ma'am, Corporal Morgan, we've been looking for you.
I don't understand. Is Liam?
Your son is fine, ma'am. In fact, he sent us.
They mocked a female veteran in a wheelchair. Then her son's Army unit surrounded the cafe. When Corporal Rachel Morgan wheeled herself into Benny's diner for her morning coffee, the group of college students at Table 6 started their usual cruel jokes about the broken soldier. But when her son's entire Army unit suddenly surrounded the cafe, those same bullies were about to learn who they were really messing with. Benny's Diner sat on the corner of Main Street and Veterans Boulevard in the small town of Cedar Falls, its red vinyl booths and checkered floor unchanged since the 1950s. The morning sun streamed through large windows that overlooked the town square, where a bronze statue of a World War II soldier stood guard over the peaceful community. The diner buzzed with the familiar sounds of small-town life. Coffee cups clinking against saucers, the sizzle of bacon on the grill, and the comfortable murmur of neighbors catching up on local news before starting their day. Corporal Rachel Morgan, 42, navigated her wheelchair through the diner's entrance with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to adapt to a world not designed for her needs. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and despite the challenges she faced daily, her green eyes still held the sharp intelligence and determination that had made her an exceptional soldier before an IED explosion in Afghanistan changed her life forever. Rachel had served 3 tours overseas as a combat medic, saving countless lives under fire before the roadside bomb that took her legs also ended her military career. The transition to civilian life had been brutal, not just physically, but emotionally, as she struggled to find her place in a society that often saw her wheelchair before they saw the hero who had earned 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. Every morning for the past 6 months, Rachel had made the same journey to Benny's Diner, ordering black coffee and wheat toast, while trying to maintain some semblance of the routine that had once defined her military life. It was her small act of defiance against the isolation and depression that threatened to consume her, a declaration that she would not hide from the world despite its cruelties. The challenge Rachel faced wasn't just the physical limitations of her disability, but the daily humiliation she endured from a group of college students who had made her their target for entertainment. Led by Brad Hutchins, a privileged 20-year-old whose father owned half the businesses in town, the group would arrive at the diner shortly after Rachel and spend their time making cruel jokes about her wheelchair, her appearance, and her military service. The other patrons, either too intimidated by the Hutchins family's influence or simply too uncomfortable to intervene, remained silent witnesses to the daily torture of a woman who had sacrificed everything for their freedom. On this particular Tuesday morning, Rachel wheeled herself to her usual table near the window, hoping for a peaceful breakfast before her physical therapy appointment. She had learned to time her visits to avoid the college group, but today they arrived earlier than usual, their loud voices immediately filling the diner with an energy that made other patrons shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Well, well, look who's here," Brad announced loudly enough for the entire diner to hear. "It's our favorite broken toy soldier. Tell me, G.I. Jane, how's the job hunt going? I hear McDonald's is hiring, but I guess you'd need to be able to stand for that." His friends erupted in laughter, while Rachel focused on her coffee cup, her jaw clenched, but her expression controlled. She had learned that reacting only encouraged them, that showing any emotion gave them the satisfaction they craved. But inside, the familiar rage burned, not just at their cruelty, but at her own helplessness to stop it. Maybe she could be a parking meter, suggested another student. She's already got the wheels for it. Rachel's hand tightened on her coffee cup as she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of leaving early as she usually did, she would stay and finish her breakfast, refusing to let these bullies drive her away from the one place where she tried to maintain her dignity. As the harassment continued, Rachel found herself thinking about her son Liam, who was currently deployed with the 802nd Airborne Division. At 23, he had followed in her footsteps by joining the Army, driven by pride in his mother's service and a desire to honor the sacrifices she had made. Their relationship had been strained since her injury, not because of any lack of love, but because Liam blamed himself for not being there to protect her, while Rachel blamed herself for the genetic stubbornness that had led both of them into harm's way. Liam was due to return from deployment next week, and Rachel had been dreading their reunion. How could she explain that the strong, confident mother he remembered had been reduced to this, a target for cruel college kids who saw her as nothing more than entertainment? How could she face her son when she could barely face herself in the mirror each morning? The irony wasn't lost on her that while she sat here being mocked for her service, Liam was halfway around the world putting his own life on the line for the same country that seemed to have forgotten what sacrifice really meant. The situation escalated when Brad decided to take his harassment to a new level. "Hey guys, I bet she can't even feel her legs. Watch this." He picked up a sugar packet and threw it at Rachel's legs, laughing when she didn't react. "See, totally numb. It's like she's half robot now." The diner fell silent, except for the cruel laughter from Brad's table. Other patrons stared at their plates, unwilling to meet Rachel's eyes or intervene on her behalf. Even Benny, the elderly owner who had served coffee to 3 generations of Cedar Falls residents, seemed frozen behind the counter, his face a mask of uncomfortable neutrality. Rachel felt something break inside her chest, not her spirit, which had endured far worse than this, but her faith in the fundamental decency of the people she had fought to protect. She began to gather her things, preparing to leave with whatever dignity she could salvage when the bell above the diner's door chimed. What happened next would transform not just Rachel's morning, but her understanding of what it meant to be truly supported by those who understood the weight of service and sacrifice. The first soldier through the door was Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, a compact man with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who had seen combat. He was followed by 5 more soldiers in full dress uniform, their boots clicking against the diner's checkered floor in perfect synchronization. The laughter at Brad's table died instantly as the military presence filled the small space with an authority that commanded immediate respect. "Ma'am," Staff Sergeant Torres said, approaching Rachel's table with a crisp salute, "Corporal Morgan, we've been looking for you." Rachel's eyes widened in confusion and growing emotion as she recognized the unit patch on Torres's uniform, the same 802nd Airborne Division that her son served with. "I don't understand. Is Liam—" "Your son is fine, ma'am," Torres assured her quickly. "In fact, he sent us. Said his mother was the finest soldier he'd ever known and that we needed to meet the woman who taught him what honor really means." The other soldiers formed a respectful semicircle around Rachel's table, their presence creating a protective barrier between her and the now silent college students. Brad and his friends had shrunk into their booth, suddenly looking very young and very foolish in the face of real military bearing. Word of the soldiers' arrival spread quickly through the diner as patrons pulled out phones to capture the unprecedented scene. The contrast was stark. On one side, a group of privileged college students who had been tormenting a disabled veteran, and on the other, active duty soldiers showing the respect and honor that Rachel had earned through her service and sacrifice. Corporal Morgan, said Private First Class Sarah Chen, stepping forward with a small wooden box. "Your son asked us to present you with this. It's from all of us, everyone in Bravo Company who's heard your story." Rachel opened the box with trembling hands to find a challenge coin unlike any she had ever seen. It bore the Airborne insignia on one side, but the other side had been custom engraved to Corporal Rachel Morgan, hero mother warrior. Your sacrifice echoes through generations. The diner had fallen completely silent, except for the soft sounds of Rachel's tears hitting the table. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to witness the ceremony, their faces reflecting the shame that many felt for allowing the harassment to continue unchallenged. The transformation in the diner's atmosphere was immediate and profound. Staff Sergeant Torres turned to address the room, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet a real American hero. Corporal Rachel Morgan served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic. She saved 17 lives under enemy fire before an IED explosion took her legs while she was treating wounded soldiers. She earned 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and the respect of every soldier who served with her." The silence that followed was heavy with shame and newfound understanding. Brad Hutchins, who had been the source of so much cruelty, sat frozen in his booth, his face pale as he began to comprehend the magnitude of his behavior toward someone who had sacrificed more for his freedom than he could ever imagine. "Her son, Sergeant Liam Morgan, is currently deployed with our unit," Torres continued. "He talks about his mother every day, not as someone to be pitied, but as the strongest person he's ever known. He asked us to come here today because he wanted his mother to know that her service matters, that her sacrifice is remembered, and that she has an entire family of brothers and sisters who will always have her back." As the soldiers continued their tribute to Rachel, the dynamic in the diner shifted completely. Patrons who had remained silent during months of harassment began to approach her table, offering apologies and expressions of gratitude that were long overdue. Benny himself emerged from behind the counter, his eyes wet with tears as he took Rachel's hand. "Ma'am, I'm ashamed," the elderly diner owner said. "I should have stopped this months ago. I was a coward, and you deserved better from all of us." The most powerful moment came when a young boy, perhaps 8 years old, approached Rachel's wheelchair with a drawing he had made on a napkin. It showed a stick figure in a wheelchair, wearing what appeared to be a military uniform with the words, "My Hero," written in crayon above it. "My daddy says you're a real soldier," the boy said shyly. "I drew this for you because soldiers are brave, and you're the bravest person I ever saw." Rachel accepted the drawing with hands that shook with emotion, understanding that this moment represented more than just vindication. It was a reminder of why she had served in the first place. The emotional ceremony was interrupted when Brad Hutchins suddenly stood up from his booth, his face flushed with a mixture of shame and defensive anger. The months of unchallenged cruelty had created a sense of entitlement that warred with a growing realization of his behavior's true impact. "This is ridiculous," Brad said loudly, his voice cracking with nervous energy. "So she was in the military? Big deal. Lots of people serve. That doesn't give her the right to play the victim and make everyone feel sorry for her." The diner fell silent again, but this time the silence carried a different quality. Not the uncomfortable passivity that had enabled months of harassment, but the tense anticipation of people witnessing someone about to make a catastrophic mistake. Staff Sergeant Torres took a step toward Brad, his expression controlled but dangerous. "Son, I suggest you sit down and think very carefully about your next words." But Brad, perhaps driven by the humiliation of being exposed in front of his friends and the entire diner, doubled down on his position. "I'm tired of this hero worship. She chose to join the military. She knew the risks. Why should the rest of us have to tiptoe around her just because she got hurt doing her job?" The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, revealing the depth of ignorance and privilege that had fueled months of cruelty toward a woman who had sacrificed more than Brad could comprehend. What happened next would be remembered by everyone in the diner for the rest of their lives. Rachel, who had remained silent throughout the soldiers' tribute and the growing confrontation, slowly wheeled her chair to face Brad directly. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had faced death and emerged stronger. "You're right about one thing," Rachel said, her green eyes locked on Brad's face. "I did choose to serve. I chose to leave my infant son with my mother so I could deploy to Afghanistan. I chose to run toward gunfire instead of away from it when my fellow soldiers were wounded. I chose to stay with a dying Marine for 6 hours under enemy fire rather than abandon him to save myself." The diner was so quiet that the only sound was the soft hum of the coffee machine behind the counter. "And on March 15th, 2019, I chose to throw myself on top of 2 wounded soldiers when I saw the IED that was about to explode. I chose to use my body as a shield to protect them, knowing it would probably cost me my legs and maybe my life." Rachel's voice never wavered, never rose above a conversational tone, but every word carried the weight of absolute truth. "Those soldiers lived because of that choice. They went home to their families, had children, celebrated birthdays and anniversaries that they never would have seen if I had made a different decision. So yes, I chose to serve. I chose to sacrifice. And I chose to pay the price so that people like you could sit in this diner and say whatever ignorant thing comes into your head without fear of consequences." Brad's face had gone completely white, and his friends were staring at their table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "The only choice I didn't make," Rachel continued, "was to let your cruelty drive me away from the one place where I tried to maintain some dignity. But I'm making that choice now." As Rachel prepared to leave the diner, something unexpected happened that would complete her transformation from victim to victor. The entire diner, every patron, every staff member, every soldier, rose to their feet in a spontaneous, standing ovation that began with the 8-year-old boy who had given her the drawing. The applause was thunderous in the small space, a sound that seemed to wash away months of humiliation and replace it with the recognition and respect that Rachel had always deserved. Even some of Brad's friends joined in their faces, showing the shame and regret of people who had finally understood the magnitude of their silence. But the most powerful moment came when Brad himself, tears streaming down his face, stood and began to clap. His applause was hesitant at first, then stronger, as if each clap was an attempt to atone for months of cruelty. Staff Sergeant Torres approached Rachel's wheelchair and spoke quietly. "Ma'am, your son wanted us to give you a message. He said to tell you that he's proud to be your son and that you're the strongest person he's ever known. He also said to tell you that you're coming home with us today. He's waiting outside." As Rachel wheeled toward the diner's exit, surrounded by the soldiers who had transformed her mourning from humiliation to honor, she felt a sense of closure that had been missing from her life since her injury. The standing ovation continued as she moved through the diner, with patrons reaching out to touch her hand or offer words of gratitude that were years overdue. Benny approached her near the door, pressing a small envelope into her hands. "Ma'am, this is for you. Your breakfast is on the house for life, and I want you to know that you'll always be welcome here. Always." The envelope contained a handwritten note to a real American hero. "Thank you for your service and your sacrifice. You have shown us what courage really looks like." The staff and patrons of Benny's Diner. Staff Sergeant Torres held the door open as Rachel approached the exit, but she paused to look back at the diner one final time. Brad Hutchins was still standing by his table, his face a mask of shame and regret. Their eyes met across the room, and Rachel saw in his expression the beginning of understanding, not just of what she had endured, but of what true service and sacrifice really meant. Despite the overwhelming support and recognition she had received, Rachel felt a moment of uncertainty as she approached the diner's exit. The transformation from victim to hero had been so sudden and complete that part of her wondered if it was real, if the respect and gratitude would last beyond this single moment of revelation. "Ma'am," Private Chen said softly, sensing Rachel's hesitation, "your son told us that you sometimes doubt whether your service mattered, whether the sacrifices were worth it. He wanted us to show you that they were. Every life you saved, every mission you completed, every choice you made to put others before yourself, it all mattered." Torres nodded in agreement. "You didn't just serve your country, ma'am. You served every person in this diner, every person in this town, every American who gets to live free, because people like you were willing to pay the price for that freedom." Rachel felt the last of her doubts dissolve as she realized that her worth had never been diminished by her disability. It had only been hidden by the ignorance and cruelty of those who couldn't see past her wheelchair to the hero beneath. As Rachel emerged from the diner into the bright morning sunlight, she was greeted by a sight that took her breath away. Her son Liam stood at attention in full dress uniform, flanked by what appeared to be his entire unit, nearly 30 soldiers arranged in perfect formation on Main Street. The sight of her son, tall and proud in his Army uniform, brought tears to Rachel's eyes as she realized the magnitude of what he had orchestrated. "Hello, Mom," Liam said, his voice thick with emotion as he approached her wheelchair. "I'm sorry I couldn't be here sooner, but I wanted to make sure you understood something important." The street had filled with townspeople drawn by the unusual military presence, creating an impromptu audience for what was clearly going to be a significant moment. Local news crews, alerted by social media posts from inside the diner, were setting up equipment to capture whatever was about to unfold. The reunion between mother and son was complicated by the emotional weight of everything that had transpired. Liam knelt beside Rachel's wheelchair, his hands covering hers as he struggled to find words adequate to express his feelings. "Mom, I know you've been struggling since your injury. I know you felt forgotten, unappreciated, like your service didn't matter. I know because I've felt the same way, sometimes wondering if what we do makes any difference." Rachel tried to speak, but Liam gently stopped her. "Let me finish, Mom. I need you to hear this. Every soldier in my unit knows your story. They know about the lives you saved, the courage you showed, the price you paid. You're not just my hero, you're their hero too." The difficulty lay not in the words themselves, but in the years of pain and isolation that had built up between them, creating barriers that love alone couldn't immediately dissolve. The climactic moment came when Liam stood and addressed not just his mother, but the growing crowd of townspeople who had gathered to witness the reunion. His voice carried across Main Street with the authority of someone who had inherited his mother's strength and courage. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet my mother, Corporal Rachel Morgan. She's the reason I became a soldier, the reason I understand what service really means. She taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're terrified." Liam's voice grew stronger as he continued. "My mother lost her legs saving 2 soldiers who were younger than I am now. Those soldiers went home to their families because she chose to put their lives before her own. One of them just had his first child last month. The other one is getting married next spring. They get to have those moments because my mother was willing to sacrifice everything for people she barely knew." The crowd had grown to include most of the diner's patrons, including Brad Hutchins, who stood at the back with tears streaming down his face. The transformation from mockery to reverence was complete, but more importantly, Rachel was beginning to see herself through her son's eyes rather than through the lens of her own pain and self-doubt. The ceremony reached its crescendo when Liam's commanding officer, Colonel James Patterson, stepped forward with a proclamation that had been signed by the Secretary of the Army. "Corporal Rachel Morgan," the colonel announced, "by order of the Secretary of the Army, you are hereby awarded the Army Commendation Medal for Valor, and you are invited to serve as an honorary advisor to the Army's Wounded Warrior Program." But the real victory wasn't in the medal or the recognition. It was in the moment when Rachel looked around at the faces surrounding her and saw not pity or discomfort, but respect, gratitude, and love. The woman who had wheeled into Benny's diner that morning, feeling broken and forgotten, was leaving as a recognized hero, surrounded by a family that extended far beyond blood relations to include every person who understood the true meaning of service and sacrifice. The video of Rachel's recognition ceremony went viral within hours, viewed millions of times by people around the world who were inspired by her story and outraged by the treatment she had endured. The footage sparked a national conversation about how society treats its veterans, particularly those with visible disabilities, and led to widespread calls for better support and recognition for wounded warriors. Brad Hutchins, deeply affected by witnessing Rachel's courage and grace, publicly apologized and began volunteering with local veteran organizations. His transformation from bully to advocate became a powerful example of how education and exposure to truth could change hearts and minds. Benny's Diner was designated as an official, veteran-friendly establishment with a permanent table reserved for military personnel and their families. The diner's walls were decorated with photos and stories of local veterans, creating a shrine to service that honored all who had worn the uniform. Rachel accepted the position with the Wounded Warrior Program, using her experience and wisdom to help other veterans navigate the challenges of transitioning to civilian life with disabilities. 5 years later, Rachel had become a nationally recognized advocate for veteran rights and disability awareness. Her foundation, Wheels of Courage, provided support and resources for disabled veterans while working to change public perceptions about what heroism really looked like. The annual Rachel Morgan Day in Cedar Falls brought together veterans from across the country for a celebration of service and sacrifice that had become one of the largest veteran gatherings in the region. The event raised millions of dollars for veteran support programs while educating the public about the ongoing needs of those who had served. Liam followed in his mother's footsteps by transitioning from active duty to veteran advocacy, working alongside Rachel to ensure that no wounded warrior would face the isolation and mockery that had once defined her daily life. The story of the morning at Benny's Diner became required reading at military academies and veteran support programs, serving as a powerful reminder that true strength often comes in forms that society doesn't immediately recognize or appreciate. On the 5th anniversary of that transformative morning, Rachel returned to Benny's Diner for breakfast, but this time she wasn't alone. Liam sat across from her along with his wife and their newborn daughter, Rachel's first grandchild named Hope, in honor of what her grandmother represented. As they shared coffee and conversation, Rachel reflected on how much had changed since that day when she had felt so broken and forgotten. The wheelchair was still there, the scars were still visible, but they no longer defined her. "You know what I learned that day," Rachel told her son as she held her granddaughter. "I learned that heroes aren't made by what happens to them. They're revealed by how they choose to respond. True strength isn't measured by what you can do with a perfect body, but by what you choose to do with a wounded spirit that refuses to surrender."